My name is Kendall Scott and I'm the manager for the CCI Employee Relations Advice Centre. I look after a team of employee relations experts who provide advice over the phone to our employer members on employment and human resources related matters. The difference between managing performance and performance management is managing performance is a softer term, so it's looking at how employees are tracking over their employment period and helping to coach them and mentor them to meet their required KPIs or goals. So it's a collaborative approach and it's designed to support them in meeting their requirements in their role. Performance management, on the other hand, is associated with disciplinary processes. So when something goes wrong or performance is substandard, that's when we start to move to performance management. There's a number of reasons why businesses should manage performance and do it on a regular basis. These include directing an employee's efforts so that they don't go for lengthy periods of time without understanding what the goal is that they're working towards and what their KPIs are. So it's about being really clear as to what the employment expectations are and the outcomes. It's also critical to ensure that you're meeting client and customer needs. So making sure that performance is on track and the service standards, particularly when it's a customer-facing role, are to the required standard and that you're checking in on that regularly. It can be useful to support employees in achieving targets. So, for example, in a sales role, touching base with them regularly to understand where they're at, and it can be motivational to get them to push themselves and get to that next level. It's also important because it can save a lot of time and stress and potentially claims later on down the track if any very minor performance issues are addressed and dealt with very early on in the piece. If somebody is underperforming, then performance management is critical. It's critical because failure to performance manage an underperforming employee can lead to a whole range of other things that can seriously affect the bottom line of the business. For example, if you have a staff member who is not complying with professional conduct codes in your business, or is harassing other employees or bullying other employees, for example, that creates stress for other staff members, and you may end up with resulting workers' compensation claims, high absenteeism, potentially losing your core staff or key staff members, and also potentially risk litigation. So you could end up with bullying complaints or sexual harassment complaints, for argument's sake. For more minor matters, it can place additional stress on other staff members. So, for example, if you have someone who's regularly coming in late and other staff have to pick up the slack, then that can create pressure on them too, and it can become quite it can impact on morale and staff can become quite disengaged. So performance management is critical that it's done in a timely fashion and that it's done very early on in the piece to prevent any of these major issues occurring. If you need to performance manage somebody in the business, and specifically here we're talking about disciplinary processes, there's a number of ways that it can be tackled, but it is very dependent on the issue at hand. So if it's a reasonably minor issue and it's a first offence, then you would usually take an informal approach to managing these matters. This might include things like a casual comment in the first instance. If it happens again, then you might pull the person in and have an informal discussion with them about your concerns with respect to their performance. It's good to document these things because if it continues and down the path you need to move to more formal processes, you have some notes on hand that you can refer back to. It can also give you some protection should eventually the employment be terminated as a result of the poor performance and you end up with an unfair dismissal or other type of claim. You can also use coaching and collaborative processes to try and get the performance back on track. Again, if it's a relatively minor issue and the person has the capability to be able to improve performance and get to the level that you need them at, then you might provide them with some training or look at some gaps in their skill set and give them some support in that regard. You can also engage in regular feedback sessions with the employee to let them know how they're going and how they're improving, or if it's the reverse, let them know that if they don't improve over a reasonable time frame, that you're going to have to move to something more formal. If it's a more serious matter or the person has history of poor performance, then you may move directly to a more formal process. Usually this would involve having performance management meetings with the employee, or in the case of serious misconduct, a singular performance management meeting. And generally these need to be followed up by a performance improvement plan, or written warnings, or sometimes termination, depending on the circumstance. There's a number of risks that businesses face if they get the process wrong when you're undertaking disciplinary processes. First and foremost, if the employment is ultimately terminated, then it's open to most employees, if they're eligible, to make an unfair dismissal claim, to put one of those claims to the Commission. There's a very small number of categories of employees that are not able to make unfair dismissal claims, but by and large most employees will be able to access unfair dismissal as a remedy. In unfair dismissal claims, an employee or an ex-employee whose employment has ended will put a claim into either the Fair Work Commission if it's a national system employer, or to the state WA Industrial Relations Commission if they're working for a state system employer. The next step usually is that the parties are brought together to discuss the matters in a conciliation conference, and then if it doesn't settle at that particular point, then it's referred to a hearing. If it goes to hearing, the sorts of outcomes that you tend to see are compensation being payable to the employee in the form of lost wages, and that can be up to a maximum of $68,350. You can also see fines imposed on businesses up to $54,000 for a body corporate, or $10,200 for an individual, or in some circumstances the employee might be reinstated back into their role or into a similar role in the business. It's also possible for the Commission to order redeployment into an associated entity of the business, although it's unusual that you see those circumstances. There's a number of steps that businesses can take to protect themselves from claims when they are going through a disciplinary process with staff members. First and foremost, it's critical that businesses have a valid reason for, if they're moving to termination, terminating the employee. And usually that needs to be based on the person's ability to do the role, so their capacity, or their conduct, so their behaviour in the role. It's important to have substantive evidence, so back up any allegations with facts that you can put to the person, and make sure you give them an opportunity to respond to each allegation that you're putting to them. It's also really important to give them an opportunity to arrange a support person to sit in. So unless it's a serious misconduct matter, you would usually schedule a meeting with 24 hours notification so that they can make those arrangements. Failure to do any of these things, and failure to handle the matter in an appropriate way, can lead to not just unfair dismissal claims, but also bullying complaints, for example, which can then result in stress claims, workers' compensation claims, or if the person believes that ultimately they're terminated because of a discriminatory ground, there's potential for them to make a discrimination claim. There's also the risk of adverse action claims if the person believes that they have been terminated because of a workplace right. So that's basically any right under an employment law or industrial instrument that they might have, which might include raising a complaint about underpayment, for example. So there's a whole range of different claims that can come about if you get the process wrong. So it's really critical to make sure that you're following all of those steps, that you're documenting everything really carefully so that you have evidence to back up any claims that you might receive. CCI has a range of services that can help businesses. If you're looking at performance managing a staff member, and particularly, I mean, even if it's a simple performance issue where the person's regularly coming in late, you can talk to the Employee Relations Advice Centre team that can walk you through the key process, the key steps in that process that you need to follow to protect yourselves. Should a business end up with a claim, then we can certainly provide support and assistance and representation in those matters. We can also provide guidance through HR templates, so we have checklists available for managers that are undertaking performance management processes, and we've got templates available for warning letters, for abandonment of employment, and a range of other disciplinary issues where you might need some correspondence.